Please, I'm begging you, she cried, her voice cracking in the harsh sunlight. But the rancher pulled her up from the water and froze, stunned by what he saw. Earlier that morning, Lily Carter had barely stepped out of her tiny room when her stepfather burst through the door, whiskey fumes clinging to him like smoke. Roy Turner, once a hard-working ranch hand, had long since drowned every good thing in himself with liquor and cards. By noon, men on horseback gathered outside their weather-beaten shack, waiting for the payment Roy had squandered. His temper rose as quickly as the heat. Roy seized Lily by the arm and yanked her into the yard. "Serve them," he snarled, pointing at the men who lounged near their saddles. Lily blinked, sure she had misheard. "No, I won't," she stammered, terror making her knees weak. Her refusal made Roy's pride splinter like dry timber. He hurled the bottle in his hand against the wall. Glass burst and scattered across the packed earth. Before she could run, Roy's palm struck her cheek, snapping her head sideways. She staggered, but he shoved her again, sending her sprawling to the ground. The debt collectors watched, smirking as though it were a show put on for their amusement. Lily tried to scramble away, but Roy kicked her ribs, each blow fueled by drink and shame. He grabbed her hair and dragged her toward the riverbank, the men trailing behind like wolves sensing a kill. Her cotton dress tore at the seams, bearing bruises already forming along her pale skin. "Please," she sobbed, her feet slipping in the dust, "don't do this." Her pleas only deepened his rage. He lifted her as if she were nothing and flung her into the rushing water. Cold swallowed her whole. The shock stole her breath as the current pulled her under. She thrashed, skirts wrapping around her legs like rope. Bubbles clawed at her lips while the sunlight blurred above. Was this how her life would end? A girl discarded over someone else's debts? Through the roar in her ears, she heard a hoarse snort. Boots pounded the ground. A figure splashed into the river without a second thought. Strong hands caught her wrist, hauling her upward. She broke the surface, coughing and gasping, her body limp but clinging to life. He carried her to the bank and set her gently on the grass. Lily's soaked hair clung to her bruised face. Her dress hung heavy with water. She tried to speak, but only shivered. The man crouched beside her, steady and wide-eyed. This was Daniel Hayes, a rancher in his late 50s whose land stretched beyond the bend. He looked down at her, taking in the marks left by cruelty, and for a heartbeat he forgot to breathe. What kind of man could do this to someone under his care? Daniel's jaw tightened as he wrapped his coat around her trembling shoulders. The men who had watched everything shifted uneasily, unsure now that someone had stepped in. Daniel glanced toward them, eyes hard as stone. "You've done enough," he said, voice low. "Get off my land before I decide to throw you and myself." The collectors muttered, but backed away toward their horses. Roy lingered, face dark with drink and fury, but even he sensed the danger in Daniel's stance. He spat in the dirt, then stumbled after the others, leaving Lily on the riverbank, clinging to Daniel's coat. He studied her for a moment, noting how fragile she looked, how close she had come to disappearing beneath that water. Something inside him shifted, a quiet vow forming before he even realized it. Whatever storm Roy Turner brought next, Daniel would not let this young woman face it alone. Daniel guided Lily toward his horse, steadying her with an arm around her waist. She was trembling so badly he felt every shake against his side. The river still dripped from her torn dress, darkening the dust where they walked. He lifted her onto the saddle, careful not to jar her bruised ribs, then swung up behind her. She leaned back against his chest, too exhausted to keep herself upright. They rode fast across the plain. Wind rushed past them, carrying the smell of sun-baked grass and river mud. Lily pressed her hands together on the saddle horn, as if holding on to something solid could keep her from breaking apart. Daniel murmured, "You're safe now," though part of him wondered if he could keep that promise. The ranch came into view, a weathered wooden house, smoke curling from the chimney, a few hens scratching near the fence. He slid down first and reached up for her. She hesitated before letting him lift her down, stiff from shock. Inside, warmth from the fireplace wrapped around them. Daniel spread a blanket over a chair near the hearth and eased her onto it, She sat small in the chair, knees drawn up, staring at the flames as water pooled beneath her boots. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Daniel fetched an old shirt from a chest, soft, faded cotton that smelled faintly of sage. "Here," he said gently. "Put this on, you'll feel warmer." She glanced at him, wary, then nodded and slipped her wet arms out of the ruined dress. He turned his back, giving her privacy. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper. "Thank you." He poured water into a tin cup, set it near her, and crouched so their eyes were level. "You want to tell me what happened?" he asked, keeping his tone quiet, as if anything louder might frighten her back into silence. For a long moment, she said nothing, staring at the steam from the cup. Then words began to spill out, shaky but determined. "He's been hurting me for years," she said. "Every time he lost at cards, every time he drank too much. Today, he told me I had to pay his debts." She paused, swallowing hard. "I refused. I thought maybe he'd calm down if I stayed quiet. But he hit me worse than before. Then he dragged me out and threw me into the river." Daniel kept still, though anger burned low in his chest. He let her speak until the silence stretched again. Finally, he reached across and laid a rough hand over hers. "None of that was your fault," he said. "Not a single bit." Tears slid down her cheeks, quiet and steady. She wiped them with the sleeve of his shirt, which was far too big for her slight frame. The fabric swallowed her hands, but somehow that made her look safer, like a child being tucked in after a nightmare. Outside, dusk was softening the edges of the hills. From somewhere in the yard came the faint sound of hooves against dirt, steady, measured. Lily stiffened. Daniel's head lifted, eyes narrowing, toward the window. A rider had stopped at the gate, shadows stretched long in the falling light. Roy Turner sat tall on a sway-backed horse, hat tipped low, a bottle hanging from his fingers. Daniel stood and rested a hand on the rifle above the mantel. "Stay here," he murmured. He stepped out onto the porch, shoulders squared. Roy dismounted with a swagger that didn't hide the sour smell of whiskey. "Where is she?" Roy called, voice rough. Daniel planted his boots in the dust. "She isn't yours anymore." Roy laughed, a sound sharp as broken glass. "You think you can keep her?" "She's mine, always has been." From inside, Lily's voice trembled but didn't break. "No, Roy, not anymore." Daniel kept his gaze fixed on the man at the gate. "Ride home, Turner. Don't make me lose my temper." For a heartbeat, Roy's eyes flashed, and Daniel thought he might rush the porch. But something in Daniel's calm, solid stance made him hesitate. He spat on the dirt and swung back onto his horse. "You haven't seen the last of me," he growled before galloping away into the dimming fields. Daniel returned inside. Lily still sat by the fire, hands clutched around the cup. He crouched again, gentler now. "He'll come back," he said, "and worse, he won't come alone. But you're not facing this by yourself anymore." The quiet inside the cabin stretched thin after Roy rode off. Lily stared at the flames, her shoulders rising and falling with every careful breath. Daniel stayed near the window, eyes sweeping the yard to be sure Roy was truly gone. When the last echo of hoofbeats faded, he let the curtain drop and turned toward her. "You need a doctor," he said softly, "or at least someone to look at those bruises." She shook her head. "I'm fine," but her voice wavered, and he saw the way she held her ribs. She wasn't fine. She was just used to pretending she was. Daniel went to the kitchen corner, poured warm tea, and brought it back. "Drink," then lied down for a while. He helped her to the narrow bed near the fire, piling extra blankets over her. She curled up beneath them, shivering though the room was warm. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment, but soon opened again, full of restless worry. "He won't stop," she murmured. Daniel sat on a stool at her side. "No, he won't," he admitted, "but there are folks in town who still believe in the law. I'll talk to Sheriff Hawkins tomorrow." Lily bit her lip, thinking, will the sheriff even listen? Roy knows how to talk his way out of trouble. Daniel gave a quiet snort. "Hawkins has seen through worse men than Turner. He's not perfect, but he's fair." He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "We'll get you safe." For the first time since the river, she let herself lean toward him, her head resting lightly against his sleeve. She smelled of river water and smoke from the fire. Daniel stayed still, giving her room to breathe, letting her choose how close to come. Night settled over the ranch, shadows deepening against the walls. Outside, coyotes called from somewhere beyond the hills. Daniel kept the fire alive, unwilling to let darkness swallow the room completely. He caught Lily studying him in the flicker of light. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. He thought about that, about the way he'd felt when he saw her sinking beneath the water. "Because no one deserves what he's done," he said at last. "And because I couldn't stand by." Her gaze softened. "Most folks would have looked the other way." "Maybe," Daniel said, "but I've seen too many good people left behind. I don't want to add your name to that list." Silence stretched between them, easy this time. Lily's eyes grew heavy, the exhaustion finally catching up to her. She let her head sink into the pillow, lashes trembling as sleep claimed her. Daniel rose quietly, set the rifle near the door, and kept watch through the window. The moon cast silver over the yard, but his gut told him danger wasn't finished. Roy Turner didn't strike him as a man who nursed grudges quietly. He'd gather others, men who liked to settle debts with fists and fire. At dawn, Daniel saddled his mare. Before leaving, he paused by Lily's bedside. She was awake, sitting up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "Where are you going?" she asked. "To town," he said. "I'll speak to Hawkins, get you some protection." He hesitated, then added, "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." Her fingers tightened on the blanket. "Please be careful." He gave her a reassuring nod and stepped out, the door closing softly behind him. The sound of hoofbeats faded down the trail as Lily watched through the window, clutching the shirt sleeves tighter around herself. The ranch felt suddenly too big, too quiet. She looked at the horizon, where faint light brushed the hills, and prayed Daniel would come back before Roy returned with trouble riding at his side. The sun had barely cleared the ridges when Daniel reached town. The streets were quiet except for a boy sweeping dust off the porch of the mercantile. Daniel tied his mare outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside. The room smelled of strong coffee and leather. Sheriff Hawkins looked up from a stack of papers, one brow lifting. "Morning, Hayes. You look like you haven't slept." Daniel dropped into the chair across from him. "Didn't." He hesitated, then told everything. How Roy Turner had beaten Lily, how he'd thrown her into the river, how the collectors had stood by laughing. Hawkins listened without interrupting, only the twitch of his jaw betraying anger. When Daniel finished, the sheriff leaned back. "She's safe at your place now. For the moment." Hawkins nodded slowly. "Bring her under my protection. If Turner shows his face, he'll answer to me." He stood, strapped on his gun belt, and clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You did right pulling her out. But keep sharp. Turner's the kind who drags trouble behind him." Daniel thanked him and headed home, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. He kept picturing Lily alone in the cabin, staring at the door every time a board creaked. Back at the ranch, Lily was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in Daniel's shirt, her bare feet tucked under her. She looked small against the wide sweep of fields. When she spotted him, relief crossed her face, quick and shy. He swung off the horse. "You shouldn't be outside," he said gently. "I needed the air," she answered, voice hoarse but steady. "I kept thinking about the river. Every time I close my eyes, I see it." Daniel crouched beside her. "That water isn't taking you again. Not while I'm around." He offered his hand. She slipped hers into it, fingers cold. Inside, he fixed breakfast, bread toasted on the fire, a bit of honey, tea sweetened more than he'd normally make. She ate slowly, as though each bite needed permission. He stayed close without crowding her, letting quiet fill the room. When she finally spoke, her words were soft but sure. "No one's ever fought for me before." "You deserve someone too," Daniel replied. "You always did." A faint color touched her cheeks. She stared at the mug in her hands. "Do you think the sheriff can stop him?" "He'll try," Daniel said. "And so will I." She nodded, but unease lingered in her eyes. To shift her thoughts, he suggested checking the horses. They walked to the corral together. Lily rested her palm against the mare's warm neck, letting the animal's steady breathing calm her own. Daniel watched the way sunlight played across her hair, how a little strength was seeping back into her stance. For a brief moment, it felt like a normal morning. Two people tending stock, a breeze stirring the grass. But the peace was fragile. Midday clouds gathered along the horizon, heavy and dark. That evening they sat near the fire, sharing stories in pieces. Lily spoke of her mother's laughter before she passed, of how the house had felt different afterward, hollow and cold. Daniel told her about years spent carving a living out of hard land, about mistakes that still weighed on him. Listening to each other stitched something quiet between them, an understanding built from scars. Just as Lily began to relax against the chair, a sharp bark came from the dogs outside. Daniel's head snapped toward the window. Hoofbeats, more than one, rolled across the yard. Torches flared beyond the gate. Lily froze, knuckles whitening on the armrest. Daniel grabbed the rifle from its stand and moved to the porch. A dozen riders were spreading out in the yard, their shadows long against the barn. At their center sat Roy Turner, a crooked smile under his hat brim. Beside him rode a tall man with a scar slicing across his cheek, the collector Daniel had seen by the river. Behind them, others waited, faces hard in the torchlight. Roy called out, voice thick with whiskey, "Bring her out, Hayes. She owes me." Daniel planted his boots on the boards, rifle resting easy in his hands. "She owes you nothing," the scar man sneered. "Old man, you can't fight all of us." Daniel's fingers tightened on the stock, but he kept his tone even. "You're not taking her." Inside, Lily stood just behind the door, heart hammering against her ribs. She wanted to be brave, yet fear crawled up her throat like ice. She thought of the river, of cold swallowing her lungs, and she whispered a silent plea that this night wouldn't end the same way. The yard went quiet for a heartbeat after Roy's threat. The torchlight threw long shapes across the dirt, dancing on the walls of the barn. Daniel felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, steady and real. He looked from face to face, counting the men, noting who held knives, who carried pistols. They were more than a dozen, rough-looking and ready for trouble. Inside the cabin, Lily gripped the edge of the table. Her hands shook so badly the cup beside her rattled. She could hear every word outside, each one sharp as glass. She wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Roy nudged his horse closer. "Move aside, Hayes. She's coming with me." Daniel stepped down from the porch, boots sinking into the dust. "She isn't leaving," he said. His voice was calm, but a hard edge ran under the words. "Turn around and ride out before this ends badly." The scarred man laughed, the sound dry and mean. "You're just one old rancher. We'll take her and leave you lying in the dirt." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Roy gave a signal with his hand. The gang surged forward. Daniel fired a shot into the air. The sound cracked through the yard and echoed against the hills. For a second, the riders slowed, but greed and anger pushed them on. Daniel swung the rifle like a club, knocking one man from the saddle. Another jumped at him with a knife. They crashed together, fists and boots kicking up dust. Lily pushed the door open, fear and worry twisting her face. Two of the men grabbed her before she could call out. She struggled wildly, scratching, kicking, biting. One of them struck her across the cheek, and she stumbled, still fighting. Daniel saw her being dragged toward the horses. He tore free from the man holding him and charged, but three more caught him, slamming him hard to the ground. Pain shot through his shoulder as boots pinned him. Blood ran warm from a cut on his brow. Roy walked closer, slow and sure, enjoying every step. "You should have stayed out of this, Hayes," he said, voice thick with drink. "Now you'll learn what happens to folks who steal from me." Lily cried out, "Leave him alone." She tried to reach Daniel, but the man with the scar yanked her back by the hair. She gasped in pain, tears stinging her eyes. Roy raised his boot, aiming to stomp Daniel's chest. For an instant, everything froze. Torchlight, dust, the smell of sweat and smoke. Then from far down the road came a sound like rolling thunder. Hoofbeats. A voice rang out, clear over the night. "Put down your weapons." Lanterns swung as riders swept into the yard. Sheriff Hawkins sat tall in his saddle, revolver drawn. His deputies fanned out, rifles aimed steady. The gang shifted uneasily, surprise breaking their confidence. "Drop it, Turner," the sheriff called. Roy's smile faded. though his grip on anger held tight. He looked around, at the guns aimed his way, at Daniel still pinned on the ground, at Lily clutched by the scarred man. His face flickered with doubt. One of the deputies fired a warning shot skyward. The crack split the dark, making the horses shy. The gang wavered. Weapons clattered to the dirt one by one. Even the Scarface collector let go of Lily and raised his hands. Sheriff Hawkins rode closer, gaze fixed on Roy. "You're done," he said. "You and your men are coming with me." Ropes appeared fast. Deputies tied the gang's hands, gathered their guns, and pushed them toward their horses. Roy spat on the ground, but the fight had left him. The scarred man kept his eyes low, silent now. Daniel stood slowly, wiping blood from his brow. Lily ran to him, wrapping her arms tight around his waist. He held her close, steadying them both. Around them, the torches dimmed as the riders prepared to head back to town. Hawkins tipped his hat toward Daniel. "You two have been through enough. Rest easy now. Justice will handle the rest." As the posse led the captured men away, the night felt wide and calm again. The only sounds were the dogs settling by the steps and Lily's quiet breaths against Daniel's chest. For the first time, safety felt real, not just a hope but something they could hold. The ranch was quiet after the riders disappeared into the darkness with Roy and his men. Daniel stood in the yard a long while, watching the glow of the torches fade beyond the hills. Only when the last light vanished did he lower the rifle and breathe out slow. The night air was cool against the sweat on his skin. Lily still clung to him. Her face was pressed against his chest, her breath shaky but steadying little by little. He set the rifle aside and wrapped both arms around her, holding her as if he could shield her from every shadow left in the world. "It's over," he whispered, though some part of him knew trouble never stayed gone forever. Inside, the fire had burned low. Daniel fed another log to the flames, then guided Lily to sit on the bench by the hearth. He brought a wet cloth from the basin and gently wiped the dirt and blood from her cheek. She winced but didn't pull away. Her eyes followed every careful motion, as if she was learning what kindness looked like. "You saved me twice tonight," she said, voice so soft he almost missed it. "You saved yourself too," he answered. "You kept fighting." She shook her head. "I wasn't brave. I didn't want him to win." "That's a kind of bravery," Daniel said. He sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees. For a moment, they just watched the fire, the silence between them no longer heavy, just quiet. He rose and found another blanket, laying it across her shoulders. She caught the edge in both hands, pulling it close. The room smelled of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of tea. Daniel felt the ache of the day settle into his bones, but he stayed awake, knowing she might need him. After a while, Lily spoke again. "When my mama was alive, the house always felt warm. Even in winter, after she passed, everything went cold. Roy made sure of that." Her voice trembled. "I started thinking maybe that was what life was supposed to be, dark, mean, and small." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "That isn't life, Lily. That's someone else's cruelty. You deserved better all along." She met his eyes, and something fragile but steady flickered there. "You talk like you believe that." "I do." He hesitated. "I've seen bad years, lost people I cared about. Sometimes I wondered if good ever came back. But it can. You're proof." She blinked fast, swallowing. For a heartbeat, she looked like a child again, unsure whether to trust a good thing. Then she nodded, letting a little warmth settle behind her tired eyes. Daniel banked the fire so it would last until morning. He poured each of them a small glass of water, handed one to her, and sat beside her on the bench. Outside, crickets sang in the grass, steady and calm. The cabin walls, rough and old, felt like a shelter instead of a trap. "You should sleep," he said. "Will you stay close?" she asked. "I'll sit right here," he promised. She lay down on the bed, curling beneath the blanket. The shirt he had given her hung loose, sleeves bunched around her hands. She watched him from across the room, eyes half closed. "Thank you," she whispered, not just for the night, but for pulling her out of a life she hadn't known how to escape. Daniel nodded, unable to find words big enough. He kept the rifle propped by his chair, but his focus stayed on her steady breathing. Slowly her lashes lowered, and she slipped into sleep. He looked around the small room, the fire's soft glow, the quiet rise and fall of her chest, the steady heartbeat of a home that felt alive again. He didn't know what tomorrow would hold. Courts, questions, the mess of someone else's anger. But for now, this was enough. A fragile peace, real as the stars outside the window. Daniel leaned back, weary but grateful. Whatever storms still waited beyond the hills, they would face them together. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe the land wasn't the only thing worth saving. Morning came slow and quiet. Pale light crept through the cabin window, brushing the floorboards with soft gold. Daniel woke stiff in the chair, the rifle still leaning against his leg. Across the room, Lily slept curled beneath the blanket, hair spilling over the pillow like a shadow. For a moment, he just watched her, grateful she had made it through the night without new harm. He stood, stretched his sore back, and stepped outside. The yard smelled of wet earth from the dew. A few hens scratched near the fence, unaware of the fight that had torn through the place only hours before. Daniel fed them, then looked across the fields where the horizon stretched clean and wide. He let the calm settle, though a part of him stayed alert. Inside, Lily stirred. She sat up slowly, blinking against the sunlight. The shirt Daniel had given her hung loose, sleeves rolled clumsily above her wrists. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked, voice still thick with sleep. "Some," he said with a small smile. "Not much." She pulled the blanket tighter and looked around the cabin as if seeing it new. "It feels safe here," she said quietly. Then her eyes clouded. "But what if he gets out? Roy doesn't quit." Daniel crossed to her and crouched so they were level. "Sheriff Hawkins will keep him in check," he said. "And I'll be here too. You're not alone anymore." Her lips trembled at that. She nodded, eyes filling, then wiped them quickly with the sleeve of the oversized shirt. "I don't want to go back to being afraid every second." "You won't," he said. "Fear's a shadow. It fades when you stand in the light long enough." They shared breakfast, warm bread, a little honey, tea that smelled of mint. Lily ate slowly, careful of the soreness in her ribs. Every now and then her gaze drifted to the window, but less often than the night before. Daniel watched her face soften, piece by piece, as if she was remembering how to breathe without dread. After the dishes were cleared, they stepped outside. Sunlight poured across the fields, turning every blade of grass bright. Lily wandered to the fence and rested her arms on the rail. The mare ambled up, snuffling at her sleeve. Lily stroked its neck, laughter slipping out. Light and quick, Daniel felt something ease inside him at the sound. He showed her how to scatter feed, how to brush the horse's coat in long, steady strokes. She listened carefully, trying each motion. Her hands were tentative at first, then surer, the same way her voice had grown since yesterday. Later, they sat under the shade of the cottonwood near the barn. Lily told him small pieces about her life before Roy, how her mama used to braid her hair, how she liked to read by the window on summer nights. Her words were slow, but there was life in them. Daniel shared stories, too, about growing up on rough land, about mistakes that had cost him, about people he'd lost but still remembered with quiet fondness. When the sun began to drop, painting the sky in streaks of orange and rose, Daniel went to fetch water from the well. Lily stayed by the porch, watching the horizon. A breeze lifted her hair. She thought of the river, of how close she had come to sinking forever, and she hugged her arms around herself. Yet she also thought of Daniel's steady hands pulling her out, of the sheriff's firm voice cutting through fear, of the quiet now wrapping the ranch like a promise. Daniel returned and set the bucket down. He studied her face and saw both weariness and strength there. "You're tougher than you know," he said. She met his eyes and, for the first time, allowed herself a small, sure smile. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe I get that from fighting too long." Daniel chuckled softly. "Or maybe you were always tough. You just needed someone to remind you." As twilight settled, they went back inside. Daniel checked the doors and windows, making sure each latch held. Lily lay back on the bed, the blanket drawn up under her chin. She watched the firelight dance across the beams overhead, then looked at Daniel sitting nearby. "You stayed," she said simply. "I meant to," he replied. The cabin felt warmer than it had in years. Outside, stars began to bloom across the darkening sky. For the first time since she could remember, Lily let herself believe that tomorrow might be hers to shape, not something stolen by someone else. Dawn spread slow across the prairie, washing the cabin in soft light. Daniel opened the door and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the smell of cool grass and damp earth. The hills were quiet, touched with the pale gold of a new day. For the first time since all of it began, he felt the night's weight loosen from his shoulders. Inside, Lily stirred awake. She stretched carefully, wincing a little at the fading bruises along her ribs, then sat up. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, and she blinked at the morning glow. "It's beautiful out there," she said. Daniel nodded. "The land always looks different after a storm." She rose, steady on her feet now, and joined him outside. Together they watched the sun lift over the fields, turning every drop of dew into a spark of light. Lily hugged the worn shirt closer around her. "I didn't think I'd see another morning like this," she murmured. "You made it here," Daniel said. "That means you were stronger than everything that tried to pull you under." She looked at him, eyes clearer than they had been in days. Almost believed the river was all there was. Just dark and cold. Her voice shook, but she stood tall. "Now I know there's more." Daniel rested a hand on the railing. "Life can be cruel," he said quietly, "but isn't all cruelty. Sometimes it sends a hand to lift you out or asks you to be that hand for someone else." They walked down toward the pasture, where the horses grazed in soft light. Lily reached out and let one nuzzle her palm, laughing softly when its breath tickled her skin. The sound filled the morning with a gentle strength. Daniel watched her, proud of how she'd begun to claim space in a world that once only hurt her. After chores, they shared breakfast by the open window. Lily ate without the old tremor of fear in her hands. She spoke of plans, small things, mending a fence, maybe planting flowers near the steps, writing a letter to a cousin she hadn't seen in years. Daniel listened, nodding, offering quiet encouragement. Each idea was a piece of a life she hadn't dared imagine. Before noon, Sheriff Hawkins rode up. He swung from the saddle, dusting off his hat. "Turner and the others are locked up tight," he reported. "They'll face the judge. You won't see them for a long time." Relief flickered across Lily's face, mingled with the steady calm she was starting to wear like a second skin. The sheriff tipped his hat to them both. "You two take care." Then he mounted and headed back down the road, leaving silence and sunlight behind. Lily stepped closer to Daniel, her gaze following the retreating horse. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she said. He looked at her, gentle but firm. "Live," he said, "one step at a time. Build something worth keeping. Don't let what he did decide who you get to be." She breathed in, deep and sure, as if drawing that promise in her chest. "I'd like that," she said. They spent the rest of the morning mending a bit of fence near the corral. Daniel handed her tools, showing her how to set each board straight. She worked with quiet focus, shoulders steady. There was still a long road ahead. Memories that might ache, nights when fear would return. But there was also the solid weight of earth beneath her boots, the warmth of a fire waiting, and someone beside her who believed she deserved a chance. As the sun climbed higher, Daniel glanced at Lily and saw her looking back, a real smile breaking through. In that moment, he understood the truth their long night had carved into them both. No darkness lasts forever, and no one should have to climb out alone. The moral of their story was clear. Even in the worst valley, hope can rise if someone dares to reach out, and if the one who's hurting chooses to take that hand. Kindness, courage, and a little stubborn light can turn a broken life into one worth living. Lily wiped her hands on her skirt and faced the open sky. For the first time in years, the future didn't scare her. It looked wide, green, and waiting, and beside her stood Daniel, calm and steady, ready to walk with her into whatever came next.